So for context, my wife and I, have been together for about 7 years. When we first moved in, I realized that our first apartment together would not be big enough to support both of us, as well as our cats. Early note: the cats live in a sanitary home and are active, healthy, and eat better than we do. She had a lot of clothes and shoes compared to me and took up a majority of the about 5 by 5 closet space to where the shoes would take up most of the floor. Our apartment was small, however, and I hadn't unpacked a lot of my belongings anyway because I intended to stay there for only a year. I did not consider comparing who had how much because everything was in boxes anyway. When we finally moved into our house a couple years ago, I began to have some concerns about how she viewed decorating. If the conversation went into the topic, she would say I was a typical man for not being interested in it and that she hated living in a house that didn't look lived in. It would spark a few arguments, mainly because I would try to convince her that we didn't need decorations and my priorities were directed towards having our belongings unpacked first with rent and utilities appropriately dealt with. I also had difficulty seeing the point in doing so because we're going to be moving around in the next couple years, less than 3 years, anyway, into a house we would actually own, rather than rent. Decorating could come later, slowly, and my job distracted me from really contributing mental space to helping. She would, however, dismiss this and give an argument that conflated decorating as an actual necessity, and further trying to express my point would seem to just make her angry. She purchased things to decorate with anyway, and in her defense, I was pretty stubborn, so I don't blame her for that. I began to come around to her point of view, also. I figured that making our home more homey was probably better for our mental health, and I worked a stressful job, so I figure it wouldn't hurt at least. She started off buying a bunch of cheap posters of art which we both liked and framing them in cheap Walmart frames, and it looked quite good. We later went thrifting and got actual oil paintings too. Then came houseplants for inside and the patio, which she does an excellent job of taking care of. I even contributed to a few purchases as little treats because it made her happy, but I put my foot down whenever she was obviously making an impulse buy. The real problems began when she started collecting knickknacks. I was hesitant with her doing this because it seemed like these were mostly impulse buys off of Amazon or Etsy. She began buying random little things to place around the house, on shelves, ledges, windows, etc., and it was starting to clutter up the house noticeably. Although she's managed to find a spot for most of it, there is still just stuff sort of lying around without a place to go, and she was getting packages almost daily, full of what I could only label as just random crap. She even had some sort of subscription service to get a vintage mystery box, which was really just random stuff you could get from a thrift store. She never told me how much this was, but I could easily guess it was well over the actual value it would be at Goodwill. I've brought up the idea that we should take some of this stuff, as well as the shoes and clothes she doesn't wear anymore, and just donate it, because some of it was just obviously not going to be used for anything, and she became upset that I was being so wasteful. She gets similarly upset at me for throwing away containers and used sauce packets or utensils from fast food or HelloFreshes, even though they might have been sitting in the fridge for weeks at a time. My boiling point came up when she brought home some sort of rodent skull she found on her way home from work. She likes fossils and minerals in particular, so it wasn't totally surprising. It was clean and bleached white, so it wasn't exactly unsanitary, but nonetheless it made me physically cringe in disgust, which started an argument. I think a contributing factor was that the clutter was passively stressing me out all the time as well, but the idea she thought it would be okay to just collect random animal skeletons set something off in me, and I flat out just told her it's disgusting and she was becoming a hoarder, and that she wasn't considering how we were going to transport all this stuff when we finally had to move. She still kept the skull and put it up in a small shelf where she keeps fossils and the like, but she never denied what I said. Things have calmed down and she's told me she hasn't made any impulse buys. She even canceled that god-awful subscription. But I'm still being stressed by how there seems to just be stuff everywhere now, and the stress is starting to affect my sleep. I have PTSD from a work-related accident as well, which doesn't help. I'm not really sure how to approach the situation at this point, and I've really just developed this habit of telling her no every time she wants us to get something because the mechanics of buying things from the store and trying to put it somewhere in the house is just too exhausting for me at this point to want to deal with it. It's not like this comes from a bad place either. I think what she's doing isn't healthy, and she needs to focus more on a different hobby rather than collecting things because of just how out of hand it seems to get. It just seems that whenever I bring up these problems I have, I'm saying something wrong and upsetting her.